Hi, Steve Elfrink with Omterra. I'm going to share a little bit about somatic or a more body-focused approach with psychedelic therapy. So this is probably my preferred model for folks who are looking for deep healing, deep resolution to complex PTSD, depression, anxiety, anything that, it's been a challenge, other things aren't working, and you really want to go deep. This is probably the best model for that. And the fascinating thing about working from a body perspective, the model I work with, typically we're using a very low dose of ketamine, nothing close to what, if you go to a ketamine clinic or the traditional use of ketamine, we're using what would be called a psycholytic or low dose ketamine when working with body. So for myself, I'm someone who's tried pretty much, not even pretty much, every major psychedelic over a span of 40 years. That would include LSD, DMT, peyote, ayahuasca, MDMA, ibogaine, 5-MeO, DMT, and combinations of those in different forms, large doses, and even in an FDA study with psilocybin. And that was a pharmacokinetic study that was just looking at blood serum levels for FDA study, and also looking at high dose psilocybin for adverse reactions. That's a whole other story. But I tried everything. I tried every combo of psychedelic. And for me, the primary quest was trying to understand why I was dealing with depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, intrusive thoughts, and why would I'd have these epiphanies, these, downloads, reframing of my life, and then all the depression and everything would come back. And it wasn't until, in my 50s that I really discovered, for me, what became the true source and the true solution to everything I was dealing with, which was going to a more body-focused, more trauma-focused format or modality. Let's call it a modality that targets the body and where trauma is held. And for me, what I came to really understand is the anxiety, the depression that I was experiencing was a biological response. It's not a mental illness, but just a biological response to trauma that I had as a child, and it just stays in the body as this unresolved emotional charge, reactivity, but just this, wellspring of depression and wellspring of anxiety and intrusive thoughts and the suicidal ideation. But those can all be framed, or, you can start to see those as from a different perspective or a different lens, a biological lens, as it's just bodies just trying to process whatever's in there, constantly trying to process this held charge and reactivity that comes from childhood trauma for most of us. So with focusing on the body, it just takes us to a whole different level of healing. And this isn't an insight-based model. It's not, figuring something out or understanding something. It's purely a biological approach. And it's really just framing mental illness as a biological illness. I would call it, a psychobiological, challenge from an environment that was not conducive for a healthy child to grow up in. And whatever that looks like, and there can be, some people call it capital T trauma, some people call it small t trauma, which would be like neglect, abandonment, and it can be just emotional abandonment. Everyone's got some level of trauma in them, and everything has a spectrum to it. There's not, even like PTSD, there's a spectrum. Complex PTSD, there's a spectrum. Depression is a spectrum. Anxiety has a spectrum. And there's a severity to all that. More complex, more severe. So it's just, there's so much variability in what we're trying to deal with as humans, trying to figure out our lives. So one thing to just, first of all, just understand, we're complex. I call them, we're complicated creatures. There's just a lot going on in there. So back to this approach I use. It's called Psychedelic Somatic Interactional Psychotherapy. And it comes out of the lineage of Peter Levine and then Eric Walterstorff, one of his students. If you don't know Peter Levine, he's the one, along with Bessel van der Kolk, who really brought body into mental illness and mental health. I don't even like illness. I don't even like mental health because it's biological health, really. But it was Peter Levine's work, and he's the one who, probably the most famous, who that's really brought body into focus. And then again, another person, Bessel van der Kolk. I recommend diving into both those guys. But this lineage of Peter Levine's work, and then it came through Eric Walterstorff, who's basically what we're doing is modification of Eric's model. And then Saj Razvi, who is a psychotherapist out of the Denver area, was the first to really start to introduce medicine as part of a FDA study when he was in a MAPS trial for MDMA. And then other folks have added to it along the road. And for me, I added to Eric's model, and the model I learned from Saj Razvi. So there's been an evolution with a lot of this. And that's just part of the nature of anything new. There's always going to be an evolution. So enough of that. But what is the model? What is psychedelic somatic interactional psychotherapy? Great question. So the best answer to that is what we're basically doing is accessing this place in primary consciousness. So we have secondary consciousness, which would be cognitive thinking, listening to me talk right now, thinking about, I got to pay the bills, I got to do this, that, thinking about just day-to-day stuff. Secondary consciousness. Primary consciousness is the place of dreams, non-rational, non-linear. Doesn't make sense sometimes. A lot of time doesn't make sense. That's the place of dreams. But it's primary consciousness that really controls us day by day. The way I look at it is they're like base operating system. So the other thing, what's fascinating about primary consciousness is that's where trauma is held. That's where the body stores trauma, is in primary consciousness, but stores it in this primary consciousness and then within the whole body system. And the way to start looking at this is just to understand that the body is basically one giant brain. I mean, it doesn't just end inside our heads, what's between our ears, but it goes down through our entire nervous system as just a giant extension of the brain, even down into stomach. Stomach is the primary producer of serotonin. Everyone thinks serotonin's in the brain, but it's really primarily produced in the stomach. So the body is, again, one giant brain, and what we're trying to access is this part of this giant brain of primary consciousness, of body, in this nervous system where this trauma that everyone's got to some degree is held. So what this model does, it's brilliant at allowing activation of what's called the autonomic nervous system. So autonomic nervous system is just your entire, basically, nervous system. And there there are two different aspects to the nervous system. It's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Sorry, say that again. Sympathetic and parasympathetic. So sympathetic would be kind of where fight or flight lives. So everyone's probably heard of fight or flight. You're being chased by someone, you're going to go into fight or flight. A gazelle's being chased by a lion, it goes into fight or flight. Every animal has a nervous system, an autonomic nervous system. Every animal has its own version of fight or flight. That's a sympathetic response. Sympathetic response includes fast heart rate, dilated pupils, rapid thinking. You're just hyper alert and ready to fight or flight. But what can happen is, the body can only sustain that for so long, and after a bit, it has to go poof. The poof, first we're going to do is hit a point of overwhelm where the body's like, I can't do this anymore. I can't sustain this 180 heartbeat. The system's going to die here. So what happens is body goes into a point of overwhelm and then into dissociation or freeze. So you might have heard fight, flight, freeze. There's also fight, flight, dissociation is what actually happens. So the key here is just understanding that once someone goes into dissociation, what they're going into is an endogenous opioid dump. So the body's literally flooded with equivalent to about 7 to 8 milligrams of morphine. That person is just now drugged, literally drugged. So there's beauty in that, and that's when we go into a parasympathetic response where everything just shuts down. Mind goes to slow thinking, the body, blood's not being pumped out to the extremities, everything just kind of gets shut down. And that's where someone can go through a whole experience and not even remember it. Like someone can say, I walked into the hotel room, saw a man standing there, I think it was a man, and I don't remember anything after that. So they went into this dissociative state. Memory gets shut down, But the body becomes this just tape recorder recording everything that happened. And this model, this PSIP model, the way it works is allows us access to the tape recorder that body recorded. So what can happen, especially in early childhood, even to preverbal, even birth trauma, early childhood, preverbal trauma, all that is still recorded. And we can go back and still even see that record of what happened. So by just using a little bit of ketamine, what we're looking at is a dose of maybe 60 milligrams sublingual, which is about 15 milligrams or so. And if you're going into like an IV clinic, you might be going up to 90, 120 milligrams. So they're more interested in taking you way out. What I'm looking to do when I work with someone at this model is just get executive function a little bit offline. It's not like really trying to get you high. It's just trying to get mind to shut down a little bit and then drop into body through a process called selective inhibition, which just reduces all standard coping mechanisms. I'm not touching the client, or there's no contact within this model. And there's no headphones, no eye shades. It's not any traditional psychedelic therapy model as far as that setting of what happens. But basically it's you, the medicine, me guiding you into body. And through time and with this process, body just starts to really learn and easily, more and more easy as the sessions progress, go into this body state of activation. And it can be intense because what we're going to be doing is going back to that original time whenever this event happened. And it comes through and starts to come through in sensations, movement, pain. And it's never like what's not going to happen in that tape recorder of your life. It's not going to be like a movie. It's going to be a movie of sensations, feelings, but images are going to be very few. The images are going to come in and maybe a flash, like also a blue bedspread pops in, or wallpaper with flowers that you remember from when you're in 5th grade or something, some just random little flash of an image. But you could have, a lifetime of events, and you'd have, 10, 15 seconds of actual images that might pop in. But the key here is body. It's not about mind. It's not about these images. It's not about the story. It's allowing body to move this reactivity out. So through these sessions, what we're doing is tapping into what I call trauma ball, which is this ball of reactivity, this ball of unintegrated emotional charge. And it's happening every day for you. If you're experiencing depression, anxiety, that's trauma ball eking its way out. My analogy is if we had a balloon. So here's a balloon with trauma ball. And then if we just pinch that top, you're just going to hear this continual sound of that air trying to escape. And that's also what can happen to us from day to day, is this just anxiety, and we get triggered. The body's going, triggered, I'm upset with my partner. Here's an opportunity to move some of this stuff out. So what we can do in session, instead of just letting that just squeeze, we kind of open that up, open the valve, and allow some of this reactivity to come out. And it's not like one session and it all comes out. There can be layers and layers of trauma that has to be processed. And the only way I know to get through for full resolution is to go through some of these layers. And the layers can be events, and then really just going into the layers of those events. But again, it's all much more focused on sensation than anything. And the sensations just naturally come up once the body's activated. Also, it's something you can't understand. It's really hard to understand until you're actually in that experience, because people will start to experience something they didn't know their body could even do. And body will just kind of take over, and all these movements and sensations just start to arise. It's very fascinating, and it works. So also, the one way I work a little different with the model than some other folks might, and however people work with, I honor, but it's just what I found out to be the most efficacious is including internal family systems, or IFS. So, and this is also, there's so much information here. This is where I really, encourage a consultation, but IFS is parts work. And truly, if if say 56-year-old Pete shows up to work with me, who I'm really working with is 6-year-old Pete, 3-year-old Pete, whoever at whatever age, any level of trauma happened to Pete, we're going to be working at that level. So an IFS is about parts and really about, working with the child versus that adult. Because the adult, I've heard this said before, and I really agree with this, that as an adult, we spend our entire adult life is really trying to untangle or understand and come to terms with what happened to us from 0 to 7. Because that's that formative years of our life, 0 to 7. And a lot of what we're dealing with as adults is what happened in that 0 to 7. This model takes us to that 0 to 7, much more efficacious, much more thorough than psilocybin, LSD, ayahuasca, DMT, peyote are going to do. And those all have a beautiful place, but they're not going to take you to this core of trauma in this more somatic or body-focused approach that creates this just intense on many levels, but this release of that reactivity, that release of those sensations, all that charge you've been holding. So I know that's a lot to take in. What I recommend is reading through the information on the website and doing your own deep dive on this. There is the paper I co-authored with Saj Razvi that's available through the website that goes really deep into the model. If you're that guy or that lady who wants to go deeper, I recommend reading the white paper that's on the website. But also, I'm happy to hop on any call with someone to talk further about this, to see if it's the right fit, and to go deeper into this. It's really hard to explain the whole model in a short video here, but I was hoping to give you just a general overview of it. And the big thing to know also, a takeaway, is there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with it. You're having a biological response, and there's a way through that's going to work, that's going to provide symptom resolution. It takes commitment, some time, and it's intense, but it's a good intensity. And typically people will go through a session, it can be really intense, and when's my next session? Because it's connecting, part of it connects you to this child that never got to feel, never had a voice. What we're doing is giving that child a voice. So I hope that helps a little, and yeah, just reach out through the contact page. We can schedule a consult, dive into this further, but I really believe in this model. It changed my life, and my mission right now is just helping other folks to get through, to have a full life, and it's possible. Thanks for listening. Take care.